Welcome to another instruction video in Synology Studio BEA5. Today I'm going to introduce a number of new devices, the sample and hold, the envelope generator and pulse divider or variable scaler. First, let's have a look at the sample and hold, which is also a moment to introduce the third category of signals in the studio. So far we had analog sound, so sound signals. We had voltage control, and we had, I mentioned already, the third category, which are the triggers, but we haven't been using triggers so far, but that I'm going to do now for the first time. So in one of our previous instruction videos, I showed you how to modulate the frequency of one function generator with a control signal from another one. So just to refresh your memory, we had a voltage controlled function generator, which was in this case on internal, and it had a slow DC triangle wave. And that was a control voltage. That was going into another voltage controlled function generator, which was then connected to the mixing desk. And this one was on external, and it was giving a sine wave AC between 0 and 1 kilohertz. And this sounded like this. Now, instead of this direct connection of the control voltage to the function generator, I can insert a device here which is called a triggered sample and hold. This has nothing to do with an audio sampler, it's a sampler of control voltages. And what that means is that when this sample and hold receives a trigger here on the T input, so this is the voltage input and this is the T input, whenever it receives a trigger here, it samples the control voltage at the input and it keeps that voltage level on the output until it is triggered again. And that could be done manually, but it can also be done with another function generator. But that has then to be the square output, and it also has to be slow. So let's try that out. Okay, so the function generator that we were just hearing, making this glissando, I'm going to connect again to the mixing desk. And then the output of the sample and hold is going to the frequency input of the function generator. The triangle wave that was modulating the sine wave that we just heard is now going to the input of the sample and hold. And I'm going to use a third function generator to give me the trigger. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, and this sounds like this. So what we are hearing is the result of the following. We have a triangle wave, we have triggers, and so on. And the voltage is this. So if I speed up the trigger, that's the effect. When I change the frequency of the triangle wave, I start to hear different kind of patterns, which are the result of the interaction between the trigger frequency and the triangle wave's frequency. There are people who like to call this random, but this is not random at all. I mean, it might be unpredictable for you. You cannot sing along with it. But since the triangle wave's frequency and the trigger frequency are both periodic, as long as I know those two frequencies, I can predict the outcome of this patch until infinity. Now, instead of hearing the sound from the function generator continuously on the loudspeakers, I can also create a so-called envelope. An envelope is a signal, a control voltage that controls the amplitude of the audio signal. And since I'm going to use a triggered envelope generator, this envelope will be started every time it receives a trigger. So I can use the same trigger that I'm using for the sample and hold also for the envelope generator. But first I need to explain to you how this envelope generator exactly works. The envelope has a rise time and it has a duration, a steady state, and then it has a release time. And as you can see, both of these curves are exponential. And the start trigger for the envelope is here. And then when I give another trigger here, the envelope repeats. It is important to set the parameters of the envelope generator in such a way that they have a good relationship between the frequency of the start triggers, and also you need a certain relationship between the rise time and the duration. What does that mean? This is the duration, whereas this here is the rise. And from that you can tell that the rise time falls within the duration. In other words, I need to set a certain amount of duration time if I also want to apply a rise time. Yeah. So let's give an example. We have 8 envelope generators in BEA5. There are 2 in each unit. There is an internal clock generator, so that means that the trigger that I was just mentioning can be generated by the device itself. And this trigger will always go to 2 envelope generators housed in one unit. Then there is a switch here setting the trigger to be internal, so the internal clock that I have here, or external, meaning a trigger that is sent to the device on the patch bay. Then there is the rise time, the duration. Then there is the rise time, and then there is the decay. So for this demonstration I'm going to connect the pink noise to the audio input of the amplitude modulator. If you don't know what an amplitude modulator is, check out one of the previous instruction videos. The output of the envelope generator is going to the amplitude modulator's voltage input. The audio output of the amplitude modulator is going to the mixer input. And the trigger input for the envelope generator is going to the block output of a function generator. At the moment, the 3 knobs on the envelope generator are all closed, meaning that I have a minimum amount of duration, no rise time and no decay. If I only open the duration, I get a square-shaped envelope. So the sound is immediately on, stays on level for a while, and then cuts off. If I only apply decay, it's clearly audible that the decay is exponential because it sounds very natural. You know. Now, it was already audible that if I increase the decay time further, the next envelope starts before the decay time is over. And if I make the decay very long, the envelope becomes almost inaudible because there's a constant signal almost. So if I want to have envelopes that are so long, I need to take down the frequency of the triggering device, the function generator. The other way around, if I open the duration, I can now also apply rise. If I now take the duration away again, the sound dies out. Why did the signal disappear? As I said, you need a certain amount of duration in order to set a certain amount of rise. If there is no duration, so no continuous signal, then it is also not possible to reach the 5-volt output of the envelope generator. So here comes my rise time again. And now if I set rise time too long, again the signal disappears. As I said, if there is no duration, there is no possibility to set a rise. If I want to have very long decays, I need to decrease the frequency of the trigger because otherwise I just get continuous output on the envelope generator. Now let's combine the envelope generator with the patch that we have here. So instead of the fader, I'm going to take an amplitude modulator here. So the BEA5. Then I'm going to the mixing desk. Here I'm going to place my triggered envelope generator. The output is a voltage, so I'm using green. And I'm going to take the same trigger to trigger the envelope generator. Let's make that patch. Now the sine wave that we were hearing in the first example with the sample and hold was then directly connected to the mixing desk, but now it is going to the amplitude modulator. And then from the output I'm going to the mixer. The trigger is going to the sample and hold, but also to the envelope generator. The envelope generator is going to the amplitude modulator, and the triangle wave from the second function generator is going to the sample and hold, and the output of the sample and hold is going to the tune input of the function generator. Let's see how that sounds. The devices that I'm now going to add to this patch are called variable scalers. You see them here. You can also see that they're used very often because the front panels are almost blank. So it's hard to read the numbers above the switches. We are going to replace these front panels soon, so don't worry about that. So there are 8 of them in fact. I'm only going to use 1 or 2 now. So when all the switches are down, the pulse that is coming in is not giving you any result at all. But when I put the first switch up, I will get a pulse on the output of the variable scaler at every incoming pulse. So it is not sending the pulse through, it is generating a new pulse at every incoming pulse. If I put the switch 2 up instead of switch number 1, then I will get a pulse on the output at every second incoming pulse. 1 and 2 up means I will get a pulse out at every third incoming pulse, and so on. So all the 4 switches up, 1, 2, 4 and 8, means I will get a pulse on the output at every 15th incoming pulse. Let's see that. So the trigger that we were using in the previous patch, coming from function generator number 3, is now going into a variable scaler. And the output of the variable scaler is going to the mixing desk. So the switch number 1 is up, meaning that the frequency of the pulses that are coming out from the variable scaler is identical to the frequency of the incoming pulse. Now it is divided by 2. It always takes a while. There it is. Now it's divided by 3. Now by 4. Now by 5. You could say, of course, that this doesn't make sense at all, because any frequency that I get now on the output of the variable scaler can also be set on the function generator directly. Where it becomes interesting though is when I take the same incoming pulse and bring it to 2 variable scalers and connect those for now to the loudspeakers. But these are of course triggers, so they could be connected to anything you want to trigger. Now, if I set 1 to so I have a very exact rhythmical relationship of 2 to 3 now. Let's speed up the or the trigger is now going to these 2 variable scalers. So if I put switch number 2 up on the first one, I have the incoming pulse divided by 2. And here I have divided by 3. So I have an exact rhythmical relationship of 2 to 3 now. Or I can do 3 to 4. I mean, this is all very good for your solfège, but I can make it rather difficult for you to imitate what you hear. 4 to 5. Eight to 9. Now imagine what you can do when you use all 8 of them. You can make very complex rhythmical patterns. I'm going to draw the exact same patch again, but now while introducing a variable scaler at a very specific point. So this is the triangle wave. I'm becoming lazy now, so I just do this. This is my trigger. Okay. This is my sample and hold. Function generator. And envelope generator. And here comes the variable scaler. And I'm going to set it to dividing by 3. Now, before I let you hear how this sounds, I want to do a little quiz with you. So maybe you stop the video for a second and try to think for yourself what is going to be the result. So compare the previous patch with this one and think, what is the difference? What is the variable scaler going to have for an effect on the sounding result of this patch? So I'm going to make the patch again. The sine wave, so the audio signal, which is why I'm using a black cable, to the input of the amplitude modulator, back to the mixer, the trigger, which is going to the envelope generator. And now from the envelope generator, I'm first going to the variable scaler, and from the variable scaler, I'm going to the sample and hold, just as I did in the drawing. The triangle wave is going to the sample and hold. The output of the sample and hold is going to the frequency of the function generator. And now the last thing I need to do is to connect the output of the envelope generator to the voltage input of the amplitude modulator. Probably you all know the answer by now, or at least I hope so. So what is going to happen is that instead of hearing a new pitch at every next sound, I'm going to hear a series of 3 equal pitches. This is because the envelope generator is receiving 3 times as many triggers as the sample and hold is. Now the variable scaler is dividing by 7, so I get a series of 7 equal pitches. Dividing by 1 means I get a new pitch at every next pulse. Now another question for you. I'm not going to introduce another device, but I'm going to introduce just another connection in the existing patch. So I only need one cable to do that. And the connection that I'm going to make is the following one. I'm going from here, so from the output of the sample and hold, and then I'm going up, and I'm going to connect that to the voltage input of the trigger. So pause your video again and think for yourself what is going to be the effect of this additional connection. So I'm taking the output of the sample and hold that is already going to the input of the function generator that is making the audio signal, and I'm taking the output of the sample and hold now and connect it to the triggering function generator as well. So the patch already has this additional connection, but the function generator that is giving the trigger is still on internal, so it is not responding yet to that frequency. Now by now you all have figured out what the effect is going to be, so let me just make it audible to you. So what we hear is that higher pitches also go faster, because it is the same voltage that is controlling the frequency of the function generator that we hear, and it is also controlling now the triggering speed of function generator number 3. When the voltage at the sample and hold output is low, the pitch is low and the speed of the triggering oscillator is also low. I'm going to introduce one more device today, which is an inverter. An inverter does exactly what the name says. So if we would send an audio signal into an inverter, it would invert the phase. But if I send a voltage into an inverter, it inverts the voltage range. So if I have a voltage that goes from 0 to 5 volts and back, after inversion, it would go from 0 to -5 volts and back. That is very useful in this studio, because the devices that respond to control voltages all respond to voltages between 0 and 5. This is why the inverter has a switch that can scale this signal. So you have a +5 switch, and then as a result the inverted voltage goes from 5 to 0 and back. Now I'm going to put the inverter here. And then of course with the +5 setting. Again, a question for you: what does that do to the pattern that we were just hearing? So we had a pattern in which there was a clear relationship between the pitches of this function generator and the speed of the trigger. And the inverter will now invert that relationship. So it will turn the relationship the other way around, meaning that when the pitches are low, the triggering frequency will be fast, and the other way around. So I'm taking the plug out of the input of the triggering oscillator, and I connect it to the inverter, and from the inverter I go to the function generator. So let's see how that sounds. So obviously the pitch is high, and then the time between the pulses is very long. You have to be a bit patient. So that was it for today. See you next time at another instruction video in Synology Studio BEA5. Thank you.